Good evening. How is everybody? Good, good. My name is Lisa Boyer. I'm a resident of East Derry. Thank you guys for coming tonight. This same session has been held throughout the state of New Hampshire with the same two speakers. I hope that you find it educational. Just want to let you know a couple of things. The Derry Cable TV channel is going to tape the session. We are going to have two speakers. After the second speaker, there'll be question and answer. If you are concerned about asking a question, you will be able to hear the question that you ask, but you're not going to be on tape. So, in other words, if you have a question, I'll come up to you at the conclusion of the presentation. You can ask your question, and what will be taped will be the question, and then either Sherry or David will respond to your question. I also want to thank the town of Derry, great facility here. Garrett Simonson actually is the person who coordinated this with me, and his title is the Greater Derry Public Health, he's part of the Greater Derry Health Public Network, and he has responsibility for health preparedness for Atkinson, Chester, Danville, Derry, Hampstead, Londonderry, Plastow, Salem, Sandown, and Windham. So thanks to Garrett and thanks to the town of Derry for letting us do this presentation. The first presentation will be Sherry Juris. So I'm going to read you Sherry's background. Sherry is a biologist and an educational specialist with Atlantic Pest Solutions. She graduated with a BA in environmental biology from St. Mary's College in Winona, Minnesota. She has extensive laboratory experience, having worked as a chemist in the inorganic, organic, and biotechnology laboratories. Sherry has been with Atlantic Pest Solutions for 6 years in the mosquito and tick division. Recently, she took professional responsibilities of being the company's education specialist, conducting community outreach educational presentations on ticks, mosquitoes, and bed bugs in both New Hampshire and Maine. She's an active participant on the state's vector-borne disease working groups in both New Hampshire and Maine, and she's an industrial representative for the Northeastern Mosquito Control Association. So please join me in welcoming Sherry.
Good evening. Lisa, I want to thank you again for allowing David and I to come in and present ticks, tick awareness, Lyme disease, the city of Derry as well. I am the education specialist. I just want to say this education is free. So if I can fit into maybe your company, your sewing group, your knitting group, your book club, that would be great. I would love to come out. We can talk about bed bugs, we can talk about mosquitoes, we can talk about ticks to raise awareness, and it is absolutely free. So ticks. Can everyone see the teeth? Can everyone see this right here, this area? Yeah, can we just dim them down a little bit? I don't want anyone to miss them. I do have my friends. I do call them my friends. I have my travel companions, I should say. So her teeth are used for identification purposes. And this part right here is the mouth part that gets caught under the skin. And the teeth are curved in whose favor? Hers or ours? Hers, in removal. And everyone, there was tick removal spoons up there. Please take a few. If you need some more, absolutely give me a call. You can contact Lisa. I'll be more than happy to give you some. So removing it is difficult because of those teeth. Just a quick synopsis that David's going to get into this a little bit deeper. 1975, there was some arthritis cases in Lyme, Connecticut, hence the name. Dr. Willie Bedorfer discovered the spirochetes in the midgut, and it's from the Ixodes, was the Ixodes scapularis, and Dr. Willie Bedorfer named it. It's a corkscrew-shaped bacterium, and the Borrelia bedorferi. So in 2010, 94% of the Lyme disease cases were from 12 states. Well, let's see where we are. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, a neighboring state, Maine. Are any other states there that you visit, you frequent, maybe have family members? Lyme disease is the most commonly reported vector-borne illness in the United States. 2001 to 2010, it's spreading. Look at that. Underneath that black mark under there is New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Maine, and Vermont. In 2008, New Hampshire ranked number 1. In 2010, so they're calculating out 2011 data, but in 2010, second. This is not where we want to be ranking out of 50 states. So New Hampshire's within the top 5. And in Maine, we were 6th. So our 2 neighboring states were in the top 10. It is on the rise. Basically, looking at this graph, we're on the rise. We're above, we're looking at above about 30,000. And those are cases that were diagnosed. What about the cases that weren't diagnosed or misdiagnosed? Well, some recreational things: hiking, hunting, camping, fishing, bird watching, golfing. Well, if you golf like me, you need to do a tick check. I am never on that short grass. I'm always in the tall grass. Equestrians, mountain biking, walking, adjacent roads. How about along the paths or game trails? Land surveying is an occupation, one of the many occupational risks. Utility and railroad workers, parks and forestry. I go out and teach park and forestry, wildlife management individuals, landscaping and brush clearing. Well, we're going to have nice weekends coming up. We're going to be landscaping and brush clearing our own yards. 0 to 14, I can't even begin to tell you how many moms and dads have said, I was removing little Johnny and Susie's diaper and there was a tick in the diaper. Okay, 0 to 14, think of our children that are playing and they go off into the woods to get that ball that went off into the tall grass. Are they coming out and saying, I need to do a tick check? So remember, our little ones, we need to do a tick check. And then at the age of 40, it rises. 850 species, this is for my trivia person in the room. 850 species worldwide, 80 of them in the United States, and 12 are a public health concern and veterinary importance. Ticks are arachnids. It's a type of an arthropod. They are not insects, closely related to the mites, the spiders, the daddy longlegs. Ixodes, sticky. A tick is sticky. It sticks to you. They're difficult to remove. Scapularis, the scapula. Black-legged is the real common name. A lot of us refer to it as the deer tick. And hard-bodied, if anyone has ever tried to crush a tick, they're difficult. I love to ask the little ones, I took my dad's hammer, the shoe, 2 rocks. Were you successful? No. So hard-bodied. Egg, larvae, nymph, and adult. I'm going to pass a few vials around. They have rubbing alcohol in them. Shake them around. They're okay. They're not alive. What you see in this vial is 2 females. The body is crushed, and these are actually eggs, to show you that with your naked eye, you can see all life cycle stages of the tick's life cycle. So the egg, about 2,000 eggs will be laid at a given time, 3,000 eggs. Anyone here a hunter? Anyone here like to go out hunting and they bring home a deer? I like to say they like to bring home their trophy. Okay. The reason I asked is when they bring that deer, that animal home, they usually hang that animal. We want to put a basin, a small thing of water, not much, think how big a tick is, underneath the deer, because as the deer, as that carcass cools, those ticks are going to dislodge. They're going to come off of the tick, off the deer, and they're going to drop off. And if any of them are an adult female, nice, fully engorged, got their last blood meal, I do not want them processing that blood meal and possibly laying 2,000-3,000 eggs on your property. So I'm just trying to protect your property. So, and anyone who is a hunter, always try to step back because there are ticks. So 2,000 eggs or more. All right, so the larvae, 6 legs, Transparent, really difficult to see. Right here, it's translucent. I do have them, and I promise you they're in here. Can fit through the loose weave of a sock. And that's the one that's labeled with the white label. These feed upon the mice, the birds, the white-footed mouse. They're small, they're to the ground, they're close. Once a larvae feeds and becomes infected, it's infected for the rest of the tick's life cycle. So once a tick becomes infected, it is always infected. Let's talk pinhead, a grain of sand, a period on a newspaper, or a period in a sentence in a book. So think of how small that is. And nymph. Well, this is where we are right now. And this season, the nymphs are out. Has anyone had any ticks on them? How about within this week? How about in this week? Anybody? No? How about since January? Yeah, they're out. And they had a mild winter just like us. They enjoyed winter. This one is unlabeled, and this is the nymph. I want you to look at the size. How tiny they are. This one feeds faster than an adult. It's smaller. It's 8 legs, poppy seeds, sesame seed, real tiny. And this is really important right here. They're so small, they can go unnoticed even when fully engorged. This is where a majority of the people will pick up their Lyme. This is an adult. This is a nice, fully engorged adult. Round, it takes her a few days to put it in perspective how a tick feeds. A mosquito comes in, pierces, and leaves. A tick, a bed bug will come in, feed for a few minutes, and leaves. A tick comes in and stays for a few days. So we have seconds, we have minutes, and a tick is days. An adult can feed 5 to 7 days. It's a slow feeder. Anybody out in their yard Saturday or Sunday doing yard work? Did you do your tick check today? The reason I ask, it's a slow feeder. So Saturday, let's say we were doing our yard work on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Well, if it's feeding for a few days, we want to keep doing our tick check, because as each day goes on, she's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. She's hard-bodied, like I said, so that means it takes her a little bit to expand her body. This is a tick feeding. The mouth parts are down under the skin. Right here is the nymph. And right here it says the risk of human infection is greatest in the late spring and summer. That is where we are now. We are in that green triangle. Can you tell who is who? Who's the dog tick and who's the deer tick? Can anyone tell me? Characteristic markings? No? All right. Yeah, can we flip a light just so we can see these markings real clear? We got it? Oop. Oh, that's the wrong one. Okay. Right here is a necklace, right here. Or a dog wears a collar. A female wears a necklace. That is a dog tick. This is a male. He has racing stripes. And right here, and it's real difficult to see, and I apologize for that, is actually a white marking. Even when she's 80 to 120 times engorged, her natural size, you will see that white mark, and that is a dog tick. The Ixodes scapularis is up here, the deer tick, brickish color, black scutum. Here you go. Here's a great picture. The necklace, the collar. Here's the male with the racing stripes. And the black-legged is two-toned. And that is the male, and it's kind of just dark brown, almost black, no distinct markings. Both species are a 3-host tick, meaning for them to advance to each meal, to each life cycle, they need to have a blood meal. So where can we find them? Deciduous forest, forest with shrub layers. The animals live in there, the ticks live in there, they're under a canopy. It's protective in the winter and it's cool in the summer. It's a great protection in the heat. And there's food for the animals, and the ticks can feed there because the animals are there. There's a blood meal there. So a deciduous forest is a perfect place. Unfavorable, the middle of the fields, middle of the baseball fields. Our children are out there. However, if our children go off into this peripheral edge, yes, we do need to be doing a tick check. This grass is nice and short and it's in the sun. I keep asking my home office if I can go out to that beach and do some, to check for ticks. They haven't taken me up on my offer yet. But sunny areas, maintained lawns, athletic fields, and croplands is not a favorable habitat. It's hot, it's dry, the sun is on it, and they're gonna desiccate. So how does a tick get on you? Does it fly? Oh, who said that? No, it does not jump. It crawls. You come in direct contact with a tick. So it's called questing, and actually I forgot to pass the adults around. There's 2 engorged. One of them's yellow, so look at the difference how when they engorge, the color change they go through too. So it basically may pretend I'm a tick. So I am a nymph or an adult. I have 8 legs, and I have my front legs outstretched, and my lower legs are holding on to a blade of grass. And we come into that area, and she uses her front legs. And basically she grabs on low, and then she walks upwards, and she comes up us, okay? And so the front legs are outstretched. We come into a direct contact, and the tick then proceeds to find a suitable area to obtain a blood meal. Here's a few of them with their legs outstretched. All right, so how do you protect yourself? Light colored clothing makes spotting a tick easier. During hunting season, please go over to the oranges and reds. I don't want anyone mistaken for a white tail deer. Long sleeve, long pants. We're trying to protect the largest organ of our body, our skin. We're trying to protect that. And the shirt tucked into the waistband, the socks over the pants and the socks are tucked in. This tends to be the most forgotten. Remember, she's starting low and she's coming upward. We don't want her to get underneath our pant leg. A loose shirt, we don't want her to start going up and under. Closed toe shoes, a hat. And ladies and even gentlemen with long hair, roll your hair up into your hat. The reason is, with long hair, the tick can walk right up. So roll your hair up into your hat. Repellent, read the directions on the can. The label's the law. So, correct and wrong. If you have to be dressed this way, he's exposed. A lot of his skin is exposed there, and you have to do your tick checks. Absolutely be cautious, be aware. He's wearing sandals. He's out in the middle of the brush. He has a lot of exposed skin, so please be careful if you are dressed like that out in the woods. Dress appropriately when in the field. I just want to add this in. This isn't a pesticide talk by no means, but I just want to tell a little difference because people always ask me. DEET is your skin. Your permethrin is a product that is for clothing, for field clothing, for gardening clothing. You have your naturals and botanicals. Whatever you choose to use, please read the label. The label is the law. And does it state ticks? There's ticks on the label, so read the label. Always use all sprays according to the manufacturer's instructions, and call them. They have a great technical support. For parents, the one I can highly encourage you is to call your pediatrician and ask them what they recommend for active ingredient, concentration percentage, and an age. At what age for it? I highly encourage you to contact your pediatrician. So, precautions, do not use repellents on their clothing. Be aware of your mouth and your eyes and your ears. Don't let children apply repellents on their own. They can over-applicate themselves. And don't put repellents on children's hands. First place a child's hands go are in the mouth. Always wash your hands after using a repellent. Let's say we're doing yard work and then we go in and we're hungry and we grab a sandwich or something, we didn't wash our hands. So we always want to be washing our hands after using a repellent. Please read the label. And botanicals, David and I always get this question about botanicals, and they generally provide less protection time and can be less effective against ticks. Remember, ticks are hard-bodied. And read the label. Questions, call that manufacturer. Absolutely. So, tick attachment. Where have you had ticks? I had one in my ear. I usually have them walking on me too, because when I'm not in the classroom, David knows me very well. I'm usually in the woods, and I'll have them on me. Anyone want to share with me where you've had ticks? Oh, sorry, Chris. Yeah, okay, chest, okay.
I pull them off for kids all the time, and they're everywhere, behind the ears, in the scalp, on their legs, on their chest, on their back. I've had them literally in every place.
School nurse?
Yeah.
Okay. I have some tick removal spoons up there to grab a few handfuls. Anybody else want to share with me? Where?
My arm,
Arm, yeah, embedded, really in there. Mouth parts are really in. Waistband, head, thighs, hairline. A lot of people have told me belly buttons. Nape of the neck, private areas. Anywhere where there's a hairy region of the body, please be cautious and check. Perform a tick check. In my book, you'll never do enough tick checks. Tick checks, and tick checks. Inspect your entire body. And parents and legal guardians, don't forget the children. Inspect the children. Ticks are attached for a few days to feed. They are slow feeder. Continuously do tick checks. Even though they came into play, check them the next day as well. Outdoor pets, anybody have a Fido and Fifi that go outside? Okay. And how about if a Fido and Fifi they like your easy chair and your couch as well and sleep with you in your bed? Yeah. You need to do a tick check on them and actually consult with your veterinarian and the best way to protect your four-legged friend. So absolutely, we need to do our tick checks. All places of the body. Perform another one when I tell the little ones before you get in your Thomas the Tank Train pajamas and your Holly Hobby pajamas, do another tick check. As you're changing, absolutely do another one. Usually not painful. Numerous people have been bitten and were completely unaware. A bite from a tick does not mean a person will get a tick-borne illness, but we cannot look at a tick and tell if it's infected or not. You have to treat each and every tick as if it is infected. We are in New Hampshire. I just showed you some statistics. In 2008, we were number 1. In 2010, we were number 2. So absolutely, we're doing our tick checks and treat each and every one as if it is infected. CDC, I'm just telling you what they're saying, and David is going to elaborate further to this. This is what CDC says. 36 to 48 hours or more to transmit Lyme. Bacterium can be transmitted. This is what CDC says. State of New Hampshire says if a tick is attached to your skin for less than 24 hours, your chances of getting Lyme disease is extremely small. David's going to highlight this a lot further in his presentation. 0, 24, these are the nymphs up top, and here's your adults. Look at how big they get over time. So go back and doing those tick checks. often, frequently. How do you remove a tick? Anyone want to share with me how they remove ticks? Tweezers. Who said that? Star student.
No, that would have to be with tweezers.
Yep. Tweezers. Anybody else? How they used? Yep.
Something new, you put a glob of liquid soap on the tip and use a cotton ball and massage it a little bit and it will lift the tick off totally.
Did you do it?
No, I found out about it today from my daughter,
In an email.
probably.
Yeah. Hit delete for me. Honestly, that is right here. Liquid soap on a cotton ball. Yeah, a lot of people will share that with me. They send it to me and they clog up my inbox. Hit delete and please don't forward it. Because you can be aggravating her, massaging her. So we don't, just out of aggravation. Tweezers, tick removal spoon, made in New Hampshire, right here. Absolutely, I have some in the back. You take them. It's a V-notch spoon. It is not broken. We're going to go through and how to use it. But this is my no-nos. This is what people have shared with me over the years of me teaching this presentation. And this is what people have used as their means of removing a tick. I don't know about you, but I don't want you coming at me with gasoline, a hot match, a lit cigarette, a credit card, or an expired credit card. I cut mine up, but an expired credit card. Painting a tick with nail polish, as much as I call them my friends, I don't share no nail polish with the ticks, no. So how do we remove it? Slow, steady, upward pressure. V-notch, coming in as close as we can to the tick. Let's pretend the tick is right here. Slow, sliding forward, V-notch forward, slow, steady, upward pressure. We never want to scrape, and we never want to twist. I probably was the only one in the room who thought those mouth parts were pretty. Those will break off, okay? We don't want to break them off. Nice, slow, steady, upward pressure. The mouth parts can break off, so we don't want to twist or scrape. Pull the tick's body away from the skin. Once removed, disinfect and cleanse the wound site. These tick spoons can go on your keychains. I recommend you putting them in your first aid kit. Pointed tweezers, slow, steady, upward pressure. A tick removal spoon, there's a tick, the legs are up, mouth parts are in, and the V-notch of the spoon is right here. Sliding forward, slow, steady, upward pressure. Just a side note, I had someone the day before, bring a dog to my house at 7:30 in the morning. Hey, do you have a tick spoon? 7:30 in the morning, and I'm removing ticks in my kitchen. So, slow, steady, upward pressure. Name of the person being bitten. Okay, so we have a tick on us. We remove it. Let's get some information, because this information is going to be important, and David's going to highlight that in his presentation. Name a person being bitten. Sherry, date of the bite, discovery of the tick, May 1st. Where was it? Let's say it was on my right shoulder. How long? Let's go back a few days. Think back a few days. Where were you? Well, was I in the woods? Maybe at the soccer field. I went for a walk down the walking path. Think back what you were doing. I was doing yard work. As much information that you can have to narrow down maybe when and where you were where you picked up the tick. How was the tick removed? If you're telling them you burnt it with a cigarette, they might be checking you for a burn. So let's look at, tell them how it was removed. The mouth part's still in. Save the specimen. Make sure it's in a Ziploc bag or a vial, a closed type vial. And primary care physician, David is going to even elaborate further on advancing beyond that physician. Disposing of it, tape method. If you use the facility, put it in tissue paper and flush it down, toilet paper and flush it down. In the trash, care must be taken, and I should practice what I preach. Because I thought I put it in a paper towel, I put it in the trash, and later on that day, guess who was on my trash can? The tick. I said, okay, put it back in the trash, and I said, this time you're not getting out. I tied up my trash and took it outside. So I put it in the trash, put it in a paper, put it in, and it was alive and crawling, and it crawled out, and it was actually a male dog tick. Never put the specimen back in nature. I don't want anyone to go over and toss it back in nature. They're not warm, fuzzable, loving creatures. Do not put a tick back in the nature. Okay, some signs and symptoms to look for. I'm going to go through this real quick because I am not a medical doctor, and David's going to highlight this in his presentation. Fever, headache, an erythromigraines is right there, joint pain. These are different erythromigraines. If you are thinking you have an erythromigraines, a bullseye, an EM rash, take a picture. They do not last. They fade away. So take a picture. This is a very, very light one. This is actually my mentor's. They can appear 3 days to 1 month after being bitten by a tick, and they can expand. But again, they can fade, and not everyone gets one. Not everyone gets an EM rash. So some data. Well, in 2011, New Hampshire had 1,200 and almost 1,300 cases. In 2012, they already have 37 cases. And that number is continuously going up. Why? Increasing deer populations, building houses in the wooded areas. You know, think of your major rivers and tributaries. In Maine, I was on a conference call yesterday with the Vector Committee. We already have 111 cases in Maine. And it's only April, as of April 30th. In 2011, it was the highest Maine has ever seen, in 1,002. If you go to Maine, the first thing you pack is your tick check. You bring your tick checks with you. So let's talk about your yard, and I'm going to wind this up, and David's going to talk to you. Minimize the animal movement on your property. Bird feeders away from the home. I have nothing against the birds. I love the birds. But I want you to take them away from the home. I want you to put them in sunlight. A lot of the children, if they're close to your doorsteps, will play there, by there. Who else feeds on your bird feeders? Yeah, we have other animals, and we can bring them closer to our home that could have ticks on them. So let's get them over in a sunny part of the lawn. The sun should be hitting it, and also keep that grass really, really short. Increase the sunlight, look at your stone walls, repair them, deer-resistant plantings, move your wood piles away from your home. When you mow your grass, let's not leave it like this, because what a great place for an animal to nestle down in, and possibly be bringing ticks to your, closer to your home. Trim and maintain your vegetation. Move your play equipment out of the woods closer to the house. Restrict the use of ground covering plantings. If you ever see the ground covering plantings, who's in the ground covering plantings? It's the little chipmunks and the birds. The little animals are in there hiding out. Widen your trails around the home. And when you're walking, stay in the middle of the path. Have you ever tried to tell a little one, okay, we're going to go walking, but stay in the middle of the path? It ain't happening. And this is something, and I don't mean to give anyone a honey-do list, so if there's a honey-do list tomorrow morning on your kitchen counter, I'm sorry. But this is a barrier. It's 3 feet or greater. It's wood chip or stone, and basically it goes around the peripheral edges of your property, and it protects, there's 2 things about it. It protects the person who maintains the yard, but it also protects, if, let's say, if someone has to go out here for a ball or to do something, that person going out here, I need to do those tick checks. That wood chip barrier has the sun on it, and basically what's happening is it's too hot, and the ticks will desiccate coming across that yard. So you're creating this zone you know, you're creating this zone so that they're going to desiccate. And that's why we bring that swing set forward. Again, wood chips along the border, 3 feet or greater. It's a tick zone. It's a protective envelope to protect your house. Wood piles go out. And the reason the wood piles are outside of that envelope is, what are those air nooks that the little rodents can hide out in the winter? All right, professional application. The thing I can say about professional application is there's naturals, there's natural products, there's synthetics, but if you do, make sure you're hiring a licensed board, certified by the Board of Pest Control. Ask about how they're applicating it. Is it high pressure? Is it a backpack? How are they applicating it? We actually use, just to show you in this picture, we actually use a high pressure, and it pushes around the leaf litter, so we really get it in there. So high pressure, and anyone who's applicating should be putting up their signs afterwards. All right. So trivia, really quick. Do ticks fly or jump? No. Black-legged ticks have white marbling markings, a collar, a necklace, or racing stripes. No. That is the dog tick. And remove a tick using bare hands, Vaseline, or nail polish? No. Tick removal spoon, pointed tweezers. I don't want you coming in contact with a tick's bodily fluids. Black-legged ticks can potentially be infected with Lyme disease. Yes, and they can also be infected with a few others, and David's going to talk about that as well. When one removes a tick, one should use slow, steady upward pressure. Yes, absolutely. And the life cycle of a black-legged tick is about 2 years. It's 2 years, and when the female gets that last blood meal and she processes it, she has the ability to lay 2,000–3,000 eggs. She dies, and now you have 2,000–3,000 eggs that are viable to hatch. Okay? All right. David? You're very welcome. Actually, I'm going to put this up.
Just a reminder, we're going to have a second speaker, and at the conclusion of the second speaker, there will be Q&A. And the Derry cable channel is taping, so we'll have questions at the end. Next speaker is David Hunter. I'm going to read you David's bio. David Hunter has been a long-time Lyme activist, advocating for patients on both the state and local level in Connecticut for 8 years. He was chairman of the Committee for Education Reform for Children with Lyme disease. In that role, he lobbied for mandated Lyme in-servicing for all teachers and administrators in public schools in Connecticut. David was also chairman of the Tri-Berry Lyme Disease Task Force and facilitator for the Tri-Berry Lyme Disease Support Group in Southbury, Connecticut. He was a member of the Connecticut Lyme Disease Coalition, which planned and organized a 2004 Lyme hearing in Hartford, chaired by Connecticut Attorney General Richard Blumenthal and Connecticut Department of Public Health Commissioner Robert Galvin. Throughout his years of advocacy, David has given numerous Lyme presentations in an effort to raise public awareness and correct the many myths and misunderstandings that are associated with Lyme disease. David is now a New Hampshire resident. He's continuing his Lyme efforts in his new home state. He's a facilitator for the Greater Manchester Lyme Disease Support Group, as well as New Hampshire Lyme Disease Support Group for Teens. Both groups meet monthly at the First Congregational Church in Manchester. He's also co-chairman of the Bedford Lyme Disease Council. And for the past 2 years, he's served on the New Hampshire Lyme Legislation Committee that has worked on the Lyme bill and got it passed into law. He was featured in the New Hampshire Chronicle program in July 2010, entitled Living with Lyme, New Hampshire's Exploding Epidemic. Please join me in welcoming David Hunter.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, I think you guys all can feel like you have a PhD in tick studies now. I teamed up with Sherry a little over a year ago, and I can tell you we've been across the state. I've learned about a lot of towns I had never been in before in doing this, but it's great. We do this, as you saw there. There's probably a lot of information there that's different than what you might have heard. I think when I get through with my presentation, you'll see that Lyme's quite different than maybe what you had thought too. I'd like to kind of start my presentation by just asking the audience a couple questions to get a feel for who's here. Just by show of hands, how many of you have ever been diagnosed with Lyme? Okay. And of those that have their hands up, how many have had it in a more persistent chronic form? Okay, a few of you. You know, it's a disease that a lot of people, and you'll hear as I go through this, a lot of people have an understanding of what they think Lyme disease is, but as you go through, you'll find out it's quite different than what you've been told. I'll start with just a little overview in history. As Sherry mentioned, Lyme was named after Old Lyme, Connecticut, back in 1975. The Department of Public Health in Connecticut sent a group of rheumatologists from Yale out to investigate. There had been a housewife and mother out there, Polly Murray, who had badgered the state over a year or two and was not getting anybody to come, but she kept saying there's something going on in this town. You know, my kids have swollen joints and various ailments. I see a lot of other kids in our neighborhood with very much the same symptoms. She was sick with symptoms. She said, as I go around town and grocery store and library, I'm running into a lot of people with similar symptoms. You know, what's going on? There's got to be something environmental. So that was really the start of what we now know as Lyme disease. The rheumatologist group went out there, and of course they were rheumatologists, so they focused on the joint pain and things. They fairly early on discovered that it was coming in through a tick bite, and then they ascertained and thought it was a virus, and actually because they are rheumatologists, they focused on the joints. It was originally called Lyme arthritis. So for a number of years, that's what it was Lyme arthritis. In 1982, a researcher out at the Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Colorado, or in Montana, who had spent his life researching ticks, had gotten a batch of ticks from Long Island and was isolating, dissecting them, and he isolated the bacteria of Lyme in the gut of some of the ticks. And he said, I think I've discovered that this is not a viral infection, this is a bacterial infection. So from that point forward, we knew that Lyme was a bacterial infection caused by a Borrelia bacteria, and because the researcher was Dr. Bergdorfer, it has since been known as Borrelia burgdorferi. It is a spirochetal bacteria, meaning that it's corkscrew-shaped. Anybody here know of another corkscrew-shaped spirochetal bacteria? Syphilis. So it's in the same family as syphilis, a distant cousin. We've known for a century or more that syphilis can get into the brain and wreak all kinds of havoc, can cause all kinds of various ailments. Lyme, I like to say Lyme is basically syphilis on steroids. It's in many ways even more excessive. What we know about Lyme mostly as a public is what we hear every spring. The media rolls out the tape, shows you the ugly ticks and talks about this is Lyme disease season, it's tick season, and talks about the bullseye rash, the joint pain, flu-like symptoms, maybe a stiff neck. That's what most people think of when they hear Lyme disease. That's what we call acute Lyme disease. That is the early form of Lyme disease. That is typical of what happens if you get bit and you're infected. So it's not that it's inaccurate, it's incomplete. Unfortunately, that's usually as far as the message goes. That's really what the medical establishment really focuses in on is acute Lyme. Where the controversy begins, and most people know there is a controversy on Lyme disease, is over the difference between acute Lyme and, if it's not caught early and treated properly, what turns into a much more persistent chronic infection called late stage or chronic Lyme. So just to go back on the acute Lyme very quickly, just a few points. Again, it's flu-like symptoms. So if you get the flu in the summer, don't think, hey, I got the flu in the summer. Think, that's unusual. Maybe it's possibly Lyme disease. Not that it has to be, but it's a reason to think twice about it. Stiff neck, that's typically a common ailment with Lyme. The joint pain, swollen knees, those kind of things. But probably the thing I want to mention most about acute Lyme, the thing I want you to take away, is that it's hugely important to treat this early and properly. And those are two key words, early and proper. Early means within the first few weeks after the bite. If you can get diagnosed and treated, you have a very good chance of knocking this out and never having another problem. If you don't catch it in that, what I call window of opportunity of the first few weeks, there's a much higher probability that it gets established in your body and it can begin a lifetime of debility. So very important to get that early treatment. If you go to, and Sherry mentioned a few times that I'd be talking about things, partially because what I'm going to be telling you is a little bit different, in some cases quite a bit different than what the establishment viewpoint is. So first and foremost, when you go to your pediatrician or your primary care physician, they may tell you to come back in 3 or 4 weeks because you can't really test it right away. It takes time to build up the antibodies to test for. So that's not inappropriate. But the problem is if you get sent home after you got bit and told to come back in 4 weeks if you have symptoms, you're missing what? That window of opportunity I talked about. So treating to the bite is something that's ideal. You can't always get your doctor to do it, but that's an ideal way to do it because it's basically prophylactic treatment. We will talk about prophylactic treatment later when I get into the various forms of treatment. But just right now, most important is to know that your primary care physicians may not take this as seriously as they should. There's a medical establishment viewpoint out there that basically says Lyme's easily diagnosed, easily treated, and not a big deal, and if you miss it, you can treat it later. I can tell you, I got into this 12 years ago because I had a daughter miss high school because of what this did to her brain. So this can be a really serious illness if not caught early. Late stage Lyme is basically Lyme beyond that first 2-3 months where it gets established and where it can turn into a much more debilitating illness, one that has a myriad of symptoms. It can be anything from those same joint pain and stiff neck type symptoms to things like very serious neurological conditions, inability to comprehend, memory loss, word finding issues, fatigue. The fatigue of Lyme disease, we talk about this in support group quite often. The fatigue of Lyme disease has a measure down at Columbia University as equal to congestive heart failure. So when people say, I'm fatigued, somebody with Lyme, people who have not had Lyme may think, no, I've had those days too. I came home from a hard day at work or off the tennis courts and I was really fatigued. This is a very different level of fatigue such that you have no energy to even get out of bed sometimes. We talk about stories of people who have been bedridden and they really want to get up. They get up to brush their teeth, they brush their teeth, and they've used up their energy reservoir for the day. So it can be really, really highly debilitating. Words don't always tell us exactly what's going on. Late stage, oftentimes, kind of one of the telltale signs that it's Lyme disease versus something else, because Lyme has so many different symptoms, can look like a lot of different things. One of the telltale signs is that the symptoms can migrate. So one day you might have a stiff neck, the next day it might be a sore ankle, the next day it might be your right knee, the next day it might be your left shoulder. You start thinking you're going crazy because every day it's something new. That's typical of what Lyme does. It rotates around, migrates around the body. So if you have migrating symptoms, pretty high probability that it's Lyme disease, particularly if you live in an endemic area like this. As I mentioned, neuropsychiatric symptoms are very common with chronic Lyme, and it can be a wide range of neuropsychiatric symptoms. And we'll talk about the fact that it's called the new great imitator. Syphilis was known as the great imitator. This is the new great imitator because it does mimic so many other things. It can look like MS or Parkinson's or lupus, bipolar disease, OCD, autism, autistic spectrum disease, ADD, schizophrenia. It can look like so many other neurological or neurodegenerative diseases So it's easy to get confused, whether you're a medical person or just somebody that has contracted it. It's very easy to think it's something else. Unfortunately, we really have a lot of things that we don't know what the underlying cause is of. So, for example, MS. We know it's a neurodegenerative disease, but the medical establishment says we really are not sure what causes it. Well, so a lot of the anecdotal evidence is that MS, in certain respect, at least a certain percentage of it, is actually Lyme caused. So MS and Lyme, we talk about Lyme mimicking MS, but in some cases, it may be that Lyme is the underlying cause of MS. So, some people, I'll have patients say, well, I have MS and Lyme. Chances are you have MS caused by Lyme. Same thing, Parkinson's can also be caused by Lyme. This is not, standard medical establishment viewpoint. This is, really a different understanding of what Lyme is doing. But through the last 30 years, we're learning more and more, and we're seeing more and more of this overlap between these diseases. So a lot of times if people are diagnosed with these things, if they don't get to somebody who really understands the linkage to Lyme disease, doesn't understand Lyme disease, they'll go years and years with a so-called misdiagnosis until they one day find out, somebody says to them, your symptoms are very similar to what Lyme patients have. You ought to get checked out, and it might be 10 years into their illness, they find out they have Lyme disease. And as they treat the Lyme, those symptoms start going away. So, getting those kind of diagnoses, such as MS or Parkinson's or even ALS, don't rule out the possibility that it could be tick-borne disease. By the way, when I talked about the acute Lyme and the bullseye rash, and when Sherry showed you some of those rashes, over 50% of people with Lyme never get a rash. Those that get a rash may not get that bullseye. That circular bullseye rash is kind of the classic rash that is known to be associated with Lyme. A Lyme rash can look like many different rashes. So a lot of times you'll go to your PCP and they'll say, yeah, I see the rash, but it's not a bullseye, so it's not Lyme disease. That's not necessarily true. So, a message you're going to hear throughout this is that this is still a disease that the medical establishment is struggling to understand. They're getting information from the Infectious Disease Society of America, which is our preeminent infectious disease authority, so they're taking it as gospel when in fact there's much in those guidelines that is incorrect. So, you can have very fine doctors, but in this particular illness, this is not their expertise. Many of them self-admit that this is not their expertise. And there's a lot of what I describe as myth and misinformation surrounding this disease. So we're all kind of conditioned to say, hey, our doctors are our health experts. We're going to trust what they say. I can tell you, I'm witness to thousands of patients who have found that their original doctor diagnosis or doctor advice didn't prove to be accurate. So this is not a place where I'm trying to knock the doctors. They have a difficult situation on their hands because this is a very complicated, very misunderstood illness, and we're still struggling to understand it. Testing and diagnosis, if you do get the bullseye rash, it's definitive. So if you go into your doctor and you have that bullseye rash, you don't need to even be tested. That's more definitive than any blood test. So, if you get bit and 3 days later have a bullseye rash, go into your doctor and say, I know I have Lyme disease. I know that this is a definitive diagnosis of Lyme. The CDC says it is. I need a month of antibiotics. And hopefully they'll agree. But if you do need to get tested, you get bit, you go in. As I said, you can't really test initially. So your first choice would be, at least I've learned over the years, the best choice, because I know how debilitating it is if you don't knock it out early, is to see if they will treat to the bite. Rather than worry about whether you have it or not, see if they will give you 28 days of typically doxycycline. That's kind of the drug of choice for acute Lyme. And here's another piece of information that's really important. Your medical establishment protocol for treating Lyme is doxycycline, 100 milligrams twice a day for anywhere from 10 days to 28 days, depending on the doctor. What we call Lyme literate doctors, these are the doctors who are treating Lyme every day. They know how serious this disease can get. They treat chronic Lyme with long-term treatment. They've been around it a long time, and through experience, they learned that 100 milligrams twice a day protocol was not enough. So they recommend, at a minimum, 200 milligrams of doxycycline twice a day for 28 days. So not 10 days, not 3 weeks, not 100 milligrams, but 200 milligrams twice a day. For younger kids, you might get away with 300 milligrams a day, so 100 milligrams 3 times a day. But the standard Lyme literate protocol for Lyme, for early Lyme, is 200 milligrams twice a day. If they will do that for prophylactic, if they will treat to the bite, you may or may not have it. But you're better off taking 28 days of this and avoiding the risk of this becoming something that could be life-changing. And if they won't do it, you have a choice. You can either kind of take your chances and watch for symptoms, go home. If you find you don't have symptoms, you can, kind of just keep a close eye on it. Or you can come back and find a Lyme literate physician who will agree to treat to the bite. If you decide to watch and you find later you are maybe seeing some symptoms, you go back for testing. There's a 2-tier testing system that the CDC recommends. The first test is called a Lyme ELISA, or Lyme titer. It's a screening test. It's a typical test your doctors will give you, your primaries or pediatricians will give you. It's not a very accurate or a reliable test, particularly in the local labs. They use a commercial test kit that just is known to be quite unreliable. So what this 2-tier system is meant to be is you do the first test, the screening test, the ELISA, and if that is positive, then they will agree to do a confirming test called a Western blot. That's what the CDC recommends. The problem is if your screening test isn't very sensitive or reliable, you may miss it and never get to the confirming test by that approach. So many doctors, certainly the Lyme literate doctors and even some of the others, have come around to understand that maybe we'll skip over the ELISA and go to the Western blot because that's got a little bit better chance of being accurate. The problem is the Western blot's not particularly reliable either, again, particularly through your local labs. So, either your local hospitals or your local commercial labs, they use a standard test kit that is just not well designed. As a result, we're missing an awful lot of people getting properly diagnosed. So what you need to know is that the test is not the end-all and be-all. The CDC themselves say, Centers for Disease Control says that Lyme is supposed to be a clinical diagnosis. That means you take into account that you live in an endemic area, you look at whether you have a history of tick bites or tick exposure, whether you have any symptoms that are typical of Lyme disease, and then the blood tests are kind of the last piece of the puzzle, not the actual diagnostic piece, but just a piece of the overall process to diagnose. Many times, Lyme literate doctors will diagnose somebody even though they don't have a full-blown positive test because they have classic symptoms of Lyme. That's a clinical diagnosis. That's what they're supposed to do. If you just depend on the blood tests, you may miss it and then pay a price of having to treat for a very long time to try to get rid of it. In terms of other tests, there is a blood culture now. It just came out in the past 6 months. It's showing promising results. The advantage of a blood culture is you're actually culturing the bacteria itself. What we're doing in the other tests, the ELISA and the Western blot, is we're testing the immune system's response to the bacteria. So we're not actually testing for the organism, we're testing the immune system. The problem is the bacteria itself disables the immune system. So lots of very sick Lyme patients never get a positive test because their bodies are not producing the antibodies to Lyme. That's a real problem. You know, we sit in sport group and I'll see people going around the table comparing their Western blot results. On a Western blot, you get a number of specific bands that are positive or negative to Lyme, you know, bands that are specific to Lyme. So people will say, oh, I had 5 bands on my test that were positive. And somebody else said, well, I had 8. Somebody else said, oh, gee, I only had 2. And I have to stop them and tell them the person with 2 may be the sicker person. It's not the number of bands you have that tells you how sick you are, because actually lower bands may mean your immune system's not responding, so you don't have a defense up. But anyway, so just remember, the testing is highly unreliable. If you have symptoms, chances are you have Lyme disease, and you know, if you don't get what you feel is a comfortable diagnosis from your doctor, seek a second opinion. And typically, I mean, I do this a lot. I spend a lot of time on the phone with patients in this state, people looking for a Lyme literate doctor. I'll have them call me because I won't do it over the internet, and just ask them to kind of walk through their symptoms. And I can't diagnose, I'm not an MD, I'm not trying to play doctor, but I can give them, through my 12 years of experience, some sense of whether the probabilities are pretty good that they have Lyme and maybe some of these other co-infections that I'll talk about down the road. So it's very important not to just trust your doctor and say, well, he said I don't have it, so I guess I don't. Meanwhile, you're getting sicker and you don't know why. By the way, when Sherry showed you the statistics, the CDC for the country as a whole, you know, depending on the year, we might have 25 or 30 or even 35,000 cases officially. You saw up there, you know, for New Hampshire, you know, it varies by 100 or a couple hundred each year, but it's, you know, 1,200, 1,400, whatever. Those numbers are just the numbers that are reported. Doctors really aren't held to any, their feet aren't held to the fire to make sure they report this. The labs don't necessarily report. There's a lot of confusion over what is a positive test and what isn't. I should say that too. When you do your tests, and I mentioned those antibody bands, so let's say you have 3 bands positive. There's another problem with our medical establishment in that they are confusing surveillance criteria with diagnostic criteria. The Centers for Disease Control back in the mid-90s at a conference somewhat arbitrarily decided they were going to put a 5-band hurdle on what would be constituted a surveillance qualified case. So in other words, if they're going to do official counting, where those numbers that Sherry was showing you, you have to have at least 5 bands on your test. If you have 4 bands, you don't qualify as an official case. If you have 2 bands, you don't qualify as an official case. As I said, a lot of the sickest Lyme patients might have no bands, or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, but they're not even counted in the numbers. They just put 5 bands up. They want, for whatever reason, they wanted to be very strict in their criteria. That criteria is for surveillance. That's just for official counting purposes. That has nothing to do with diagnosis. And yet, you'll get your blood tests back, and they might say right on the test, not CDC positive. That means it didn't reach 5 bands. But you might, and sometimes the tests show the band numbers and some don't. But if it has the bands on it, you might see it has 2 positives or 3 positives or 4 positives or 1 positive. That's a positive test. That's for diagnosis purposes. You have Lyme disease. But the doctors oftentimes will say, oh, nope, you don't have Lyme. And they're going by that CDC 5-band criteria. So not only are the tests not reliable, the interpretations are oftentimes confusing. So I always tell people, get a copy of your tests, have somebody that understands Lyme disease interpret them. Don't just take a call from the doctor's office where they say, hey, good news, you don't have Lyme disease, your test came back and you're negative. I've had so many cases where people got that kind of a report 3, 4 years down the road when they're totally debilitated. They find their way to a Lyme literate doctor. They bring in all their records. Doctor's flipping through their records and he finds the lab tests from 3 years prior. He says, you had a positive test here. You had 3 bands positive. They said, oh, my doctor called and said I didn't have Lyme. So they could have been treated early on, but were told that it wasn't 5-band, so it wasn't Lyme. So it's really important. Again, this is not a knock on the doctors. It's just there's a lot of confusion about what constitutes a positive test. Really important. In terms of treatment, now we're talking, I talked about the acute Lyme treatment. That's, again, that's a small subset. What we see a lot are and the ones that really, where we get into the controversy, is over the cases where it wasn't caught early, and now you've got somebody who's been dealing with this for months or years, and they have to treat for more than a month. And most of the time, if you've had this in your system for 6 months or a year or 2 years, you're probably looking at a year or more of treatment. And the medical establishment, again, thanks to the Infectious Disease Society's guidelines, believes there is no such thing as chronic Lyme, meaning there's no reason to treat beyond 4 weeks. So that's the controversy, folks. When you go to your doctor, and again, there's a little controversy over what dosage for early Lyme, but the real controversy comes when it's beyond 4 weeks. If you go to your doctor, and let's say you didn't realize you had Lyme, you might have gotten bit a year ago, and the symptoms kind of came on suddenly or subtly, and now you're a year later and you have severe fatigue, and your head's not working properly, you can't think straight, you might have headaches, you might have joint pain, and you go into them, they're going to treat it just like you got bit yesterday or a month ago, and they're going to say, okay, we'll give you a month of doxycycline. You come back a month later and say, you know what, it might have helped a little, but I'm still pretty sick. And they say, well, we got rid of the infection, so what do you want me to do? Or we got rid of the infection, just go home and it'll go away over time. That's not true. If you have symptoms, you have chronic Lyme most likely, and it means you have to treat longer term. Sometimes people are on IVs, sometimes people are on oral antibiotics for years. And that's just not acceptable within the medical establishment protocol at this point. So that's where the controversy is. We have a very small subset of practitioners out there willing and understanding the disease and willing to treat it in a longer term approach. But the vast majority of the medical establishment, I would say 99% of it, has this very narrow concept of what Lyme disease is. And I can tell you it's causing tremendous number of people to walk around untreated or misdiagnosed or saying, yeah, I have Lyme disease, but it's not treatable because I already took my antibiotics. So they're getting information in a very incorrect form. So I can't stress enough. If you have symptoms and you have if you had Lyme disease and you have ongoing symptoms, chances are you have a chronic form of it. That means persistent infection. The medical establishment has a view of longer-term symptoms that they call post-Lyme syndrome. What that means is we killed the infection and we have ongoing symptoms that are unrelated to any infection. That's a false understanding of what Lyme disease is. Lyme disease is a persistent chronic infection. The reason we talk about it being a cousin to syphilis is because we don't have a misunderstanding of that. Syphilis has been known to be chronic and persistent for decades and decades. This is in the same family. Why is it such a leap of faith to understand that this also can be that kind of a chronic situation? It should not be debatable at this stage in the development of Lyme that it is something that can persist beyond 4 weeks of treatment. Beyond antibiotics, and there are many different protocols that are used for Lyme, doxy's the drug of choice early on. Sometimes they use amoxicillin, sometimes they use other things. When you get into chronic Lyme, there's all kinds of different protocols that are used. By the way, the spirochetal bacteria is a bacteria that, as I said, is a spirochete, is a corkscrew bacteria. It can bore into your cells, so it can go intracellular. So sometimes you need drugs that can get inside your cells. It can get up into your brain, so you need drugs that can break the blood-brain barrier. It is able to switch from this active corkscrew, roll itself up into a cyst that the antibiotics can't touch, or most antibiotics can't touch. So you end up with, again, a situation where you need a whole different type of drug to be able to go after that cyst. So if you treat this as a simple, 4 weeks treats it all, or a simple little bug, you're missing the very sophisticated elements of this thing that allow it to survive. It also can form biofilm around it. It's a gel-like substance that protects it, and most antibiotics can't penetrate that. So there are lots of reasons why this thing persists, and that's why I say in the 21st century, we should not be having this debate about Lyme disease being unable to persist. There are alternative treatments for Lyme. Sometimes people don't want or can't be on antibiotics. None of us want antibiotics. It's not, these are not drugs that are fun to take. They can have side effects. They can cause resistance, all kinds of things. So nobody wants to be on antibiotics longer term. It's a necessity many times. But there are people who, many people who choose not to do that, and they want an alternative to that. There are herbal protocols you can use. Naturopaths and even some of the MDs know some of these protocols. Some of the most common ones are something called the Buhner protocol. There's a book called Healing Lyme that basically lays out the herbs that you use to treat Lyme through this Buhner. This herbalist, Stephen Buhner, wrote the book. That's popular in the Lyme circles. There's one called the Cowden protocol. Dr. Lee Cowden developed. They use what they call nutraceuticals. They're non-antibiotic, kind of natural antibiotics that they can, many different drops that you can take. There's one more popular lately called the Byron White Botanicals. Again, another group of herbal formulas that people take. Typically, sometimes those things work for people. Sometimes they'll take antibiotics and some of those herbals. So it depends on the protocol, depends on the doctor, and depends on your own individual case. But there are alternative choices. By the way, when you're taking long-term antibiotics, I can't stress enough the importance of taking probiotics with it. What that means is, you've probably heard of acidophilus, but we have good bacteria in our guts that keep our immune systems in good shape. When you take antibiotics, you kill all bacteria, not just the bacteria you're trying to kill, but the good bacteria that's in your gut. If you don't replace that good bacteria constantly, your body's going to get out of balance, your immune system's going to get way out of whack, and some of the side effects of your immune system malfunctioning can be worse than the disease itself. So, there's something called candida or yeast infection that can really mess up the system. So it's really important to religiously take high potency, high quality probiotics once you start on antibiotics. There are several different kinds, but typically you're talking about billions and billions of organisms in these things. So you can't just go to the local grocery store or drugstore and pick up something off the shelf that says, acidophilus. You really want to make sure you get high quality. We talk about Lyme disease a lot, and what we don't talk about much is that these same ticks that hang around in dirt, like to feed on these little rodents and mammals, are picking up an awful lot of different organisms. So when we get bit by a tick, yeah, we might just get Lyme disease, we might just get that Borrelia bacteria, but we might also get other what we call co-infections or other tick-borne infections. The most common ones, and I'll list them and then I'll describe some of them. The most common ones we see are something called Bartonella, which is also known as cat scratch disease, or at least it's kind of in that family. The cat scratch fever you get from a cat scratch, this is one that comes through a tick. It's in the same family, not quite the same organism. Babesiosis or Babesia is a malaria-like parasite, not even a bacteria, it's a parasite that attacks red blood cells. That one's starting to get a little more recognition in the medical establishment because they're starting to run into cases of it coming in through blood transfusion. In other words, somebody has babesiosis, they give blood, nobody's testing for it, or they weren't, and it was coming through the blood supply, and someone gets a blood transfusion, picks up Babesia, and it's caused many deaths because it can really cause serious problems, kidneys and kidney failure and other things. So it is one that the medical authorities are being forced to start to reckon with. Up till recently, we heard there was no babesia in New Hampshire. There's been babesia in New Hampshire for quite some time. We see it in patients. Ehrlichia is a fairly common one. The big thing with Ehrlichia is it comes through with typically a high fever is the way it presents. So an awful lot of the time, if you get a tick bite and soon after you have like 104 or 5 degree fever and you have to go to the ER, think Ehrlichia. That's a pretty common symptom for that. It doesn't typically come with Lyme at that high a level or any of the other tick-borne diseases. Anaplasmosis, again, we're seeing that. The vets are seeing that quite a bit. And something called mycoplasma, which is a very, very tiny bacteria, almost a virus, that sometimes can come in through the ticks as well. By the way, I think I'm going to back up here just 1 second to make sure I cover this. Sherry in her presentation talked about how the ticks feed, and it's a slow feeding process, and they typically will take a blood meal over the course of 2, 3, 4 days. And the official kind of directive out there is that you don't have to worry about tick bites unless the tick's been on you for at least 24 hours, at least is what our state's saying, but CDC says 36 hours or more. The truth is, you can get infected in the first hour. So it's a very big false security that's going out there with that myth. The thing is, the tick, when it bites, salivates. The saliva is a big part of it. It contains elements in its saliva that help it kind of get the bacteria established right away. It's part of its process. Saliva is a very big part of the whole process for the tick bite. So if the spirochete happens to be in the saliva, it's almost instantaneous. The reason they're using this longer period of time is under one type of process, it will take its blood meal, bring that blood meal down to its gut, mix it up with whatever's in its gut, which means the Borrelia or the Bartonella or the Babesia or whatever's in there, and then spew its guts back into your bloodstream. Because it takes several days to do a full blood meal, they're using that as the only way you can get infected. Well, again, that's one process, but there's also the possibility spirochetes are right there in the mouth parts when they bite, and it starts right away. So if you get bit, don't say, well, I know it hasn't been on me 24 hours, so I'm not going to worry about it. Again, you have a choice. It's a personal choice. You can watch yourself and see if you develop any symptoms and kind of go by that. That's one way. But I have seen cases where this thing can be very subtle, and you may not realize you have anything wrong until it's not necessarily too late, but much harder to treat, 3, 4, 6 months down the road. So first of all, if you're going to do it that way by symptoms, don't be in denial. Be very honest with yourself. If you see any change in anything, pay attention to it and say, what's going on here? And secondly, just realize that it's not foolproof. You may not have symptoms initially. So back to the co-infections. The Bartonella is one that if you go to your primary, you're probably going to have them look at you cross-eyed and say, I don't know what that is. It's not a disease that's really known well in medical circles. It's just really becoming more of a focus even in Lyme literate circles. The Lyme literate doctors have been treating it for well over a decade, but in terms of really understanding how widespread it is and how common it is to come in with the Lyme, they're really starting to realize this thing's almost as widespread as Lyme, maybe more so. So I like to talk about the symptoms of these co-infections to help separate them, because these things also cause many of the similar symptoms. So you have to kind of know these diseases to be able to separate them out. I talk to people a lot about Lyme disease. People talk about brain fog. It's a great description. You've got cloudy head. It's just you feel really foggy. That kind of describes what a lot of Lyme patients feel. But I don't really like the term because it doesn't allow me to separate out what's going on in the brain. And if I can separate it out, I can tell whether it might be Lyme disease versus Bartonella. Lyme disease causes short-term memory loss, lack of focus, word-finding issues where you go to speak and you can't come up with words you use normally, but you just struggle to speak now. That's Lyme disease. It can be other things too, but that's certainly a symptom of Lyme. Bartonella, on the other hand, causes comprehension problems. So if you're reading, and this happened to my daughter, she lost the ability to read for 3 years as a high school teenager. You can read the words, they're not comprehending upstairs, you're not making the connection upstairs, and so you literally finding yourself reading things 2 and 3 and 4 times to try to absorb it, and sometimes you can, sometimes even that doesn't work. That's different than memory loss. That's comprehension. That's cognitive. That's a Bartonella symptom. Bartonella also causes light and sound sensitivity. My daughter's wearing sunglasses morning, noon, and night because she couldn't handle even this kind of light. The sound, I have people talk about, people with Bartonella might be in a classroom with somebody chewing gum way across the room, and it was like a cannon in their ears. They couldn't handle it. I mean, it causes this. And I'll have people, when I have them walking through it, I'll say, any sound sensitivity? And I'll have them say, yeah, I'm hard of hearing. And I'll go, no, it's the same organ, it's the same thing, but it's 2 different things. Lyme can cause deafness. Bartonella causes a exaggerated sensitivity to sound. So it's really important to separate out these symptoms sometimes. And again, you can't do it. Your doctors typically can't do it because they're not familiar with it. So it takes somebody who's been around it a long time to be able to kind of separate that out. But those are some of the telltale signs. Soles of your feet might be burning or very sore. That's a Bartonella symptom. So those are some of the things that would alert you to something's going on that might be Bartonella. Typically, we see the co-infections coming in with the Lyme, so it's not typically that you'll get Bartonella but not get Lyme. More often, you'll have Lyme and then have additional infections along with it. I call it the 3 Bs. Borrelia is the Lyme disease, Bartonella, and Babesia. Those are the 3 that we see most commonly in chronic form. The Babesia is, as I said, it's a parasite that gets treated with malaria drugs. It attacks red blood cells. So lots of times you'll be anemic or borderline anemic. You'll have night sweats. You'll have what we call air hunger, where you have trouble getting oxygen. You breathe and you're just not satisfied with the oxygen you're getting. And maybe you'll have what we call heavy legs, where your legs feel like you're lugging weights around on them. Those are typical Babesia symptoms. Another one that I see an awful lot is anxiety. If you all of a sudden go from somebody who never had a lot of anxiety to having a lot of anxiety, look for some of those other symptoms I just mentioned, because that anxiety tends to go hand in hand with Babesia. With Bartonella, it tends to be much more neuropsych symptoms. So somebody who's got that cognitive impairment may also have very, very much more psychiatric impairment. So, it can be OCD, it can be bipolar disease, it can be. We're finding I've been doing talks with National Alliance for the Mentally Ill. We're finding tragic stories of young men who in their late teens or early 20s were diagnosed with schizophrenia, might have been a college student, all of a sudden out of nowhere went from a top student or a good student to where they couldn't do any work, and they came home and were diagnosed with depression or something else because they were just non-functional. And then that moved into schizophrenia, and they lost a decade of their life, and they're just finding out now that what they had was Lyme disease or Bartonella. So it's tragic, this misdiagnosis that's going on. I can't imagine having somebody who, and we're seeing it in this state a few times already, somebody who really, their life was pretty much thought to be, as they knew it, their normal life was over and they were schizophrenics, and having to go through all this kind of being not in a normal place, and now all of a sudden finding with treatment, with antibiotic treatment, they're getting their brains back, they're getting their personalities back. Their parents are just flabbergasted because they were told this could never happen. So it's why we do this, is that there is a lot of misdiagnosis out there, and the more people learn how different these symptoms can be and how widespread they are, the more we can hopefully see people get turned around. As I said, I got into this 12 years ago because of a daughter who missed high school. She literally got diagnosed at 14, missed 5 years of school, had been top of her class, and We were in Connecticut, and had been a top athlete, played piano and cello, had everything going for her. We thought, here's this kid that can do, has a future ahead of her of anything she wants. Got bit by a tick at the end of 7th grade. I pulled 2 ticks. I pulled 2 ticks off her right after school had ended in 7th grade. I knew what most of you know about Lyme. So I thought, okay, if I see a rash, fine, or if she has flu-like symptoms, I'll take her to her pediatrician. That didn't happen. We didn't see that. We never saw anything. She seemed fine. I can look back now and realize about 3 months in, we were beginning to see subtle signs. After her first 8th grade marking period, she said, I'm not the student I was, Dad. I'm just not. She had a straight A report card, some A pluses, some A's. And I'm thinking she had gotten straight A plus in 7th grade, so I'm thinking she's just too uptight. I said, relax, this is a great report card. And come to find out, looking back, as she'll tell me today, she was having trouble comprehending. She was reading things and having to read it over and over, and being an achiever type, she would stay up till midnight if she had to keep her grades up here. She did whatever she had to compensate to keep them there. But she was saying, I'm not the student I was, because she felt like she was getting stupider or she couldn't understand things. But that was 4 months after the bite. We didn't get her diagnosed. That was November, early November. We didn't get her diagnosed until May. She was able to maintain her grades, play sports year-round, and all of that. And by May, we said there's something wrong with our daughter. She's just not herself. She looks melancholy. She's claiming she's dizzy and falling off the risers in chorus, and her grades didn't change, but her personality changed, and she just was having a lot harder time coping with things. If we weren't lucky enough, and she got diagnosed with the ELISA, the test that I said is so insensitive. In her case, fortunately, it came through positive, and she was put on antibiotics. After a few weeks, we went back. The antibiotics were taken and done, and we went back to the doctor and said she's still sick. Maybe she needs stronger treatment. They said, it's beyond us. We'll send you to a pediatric rheumatologist. And it ended up, ultimately, she found her way to a Lyme-literate doctor. The rheumatologist said, no, she has chronic fatigue syndrome. By the way, most fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome is misdiagnosed, undiagnosed Lyme. So anybody in here that might have that or know somebody that has fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, chances are they have Lyme disease. And I can't tell you, it's a very, very widespread, common diagnosis. I will also stop here and say the 2 specialties, as I said, when my daughter the pediatrician said, it's beyond us, we'll send you to a pediatric rheumatologist. The 2 specialties that are typically considered Lyme experts in the medical establishment are infectious disease. Naturally, it's an infectious disease. That's who, again, most of the medical establishment takes their lead on Lyme from the guidelines that the Infectious Disease Society of America put out. So they are considered the experts. Or rheumatologists. Why? Because rheumatology was the group from Yale that did the original work. So it was from that point forward thought to be a rheumatological disease. It is that, but it's also a neurological disease. It's also a disease way beyond what they think it is. So again, medical establishment thinks they're experts. They are not experts in Lyme. In fact, there's more misdiagnosis and mistreatment of Lyme disease from rheumatologists and infectious disease doctors than any other specialty, probably all other specialties combined. They are, again, they're in that kind of narrow view of what Lyme is. We're hoping, that the education and the minds will open and they'll start understanding what they're missing. But at this point in time, because your doctor says, I'm going to send you to a Lyme expert, doesn't mean it is a Lyme expert. That's what they think they are. I mean, they're trying to do right by you. It's not that they're hurting you or purposely hurting you, but they don't understand that that's not a Lyme expert. We use the term Lyme literate to define a small group of doctors. We have a handful of them in this state, and a small group of practitioners, naturopaths, doctors, and nurse practitioners who understand Lyme in its broader context. So just to kind of make that clear. Anyway, to make a long story short on my daughter, she did end up getting after years of treatment, getting her GED and going off to college and graduating from college. So this isn't a life sentence. You can turn it around. It just takes proper and aggressive treatment. But as a result of her kind of bringing me into this, the children are kind of a very important aspect of this for me. The impact on kids breaks my heart. I mean, it is really, they are the ones that are out in the fields, out in the woods, out on the playing fields. They're being exposed to this more than any other group. Any one of us can get it, but those are the age group that are most prone. And the pediatricians, and again, the vast majority of pediatricians see Lyme in that very narrow definition that I described. So you're putting and these can be tremendously fine pediatricians. This is not a knock on their capabilities as doctors. It's really a story about a disease that is still in its infancy in terms of the medical establishment's understanding. So we need to move past that, but it's important for parents of kids to know that you have to be the advocate. You have to be the person going out and doing the work. Being here tonight is a huge thing. I mean, you're learning a different story, I think, most of you, about what Lyme disease is than you probably thought it was coming in. So knowing that, you can be armed with a little bit more understand what you have to do to not necessarily take as gospel what you get from your pediatrician. In kids, think about it. These are kids, and again, it can happen to very young kids. It can happen in middle school or high school or beyond. But what's going on, for my daughter was real eye-openers, for an age 14-year-old kid to basically be homebound for 5 years. You lose education. She went from being a top student in her class to not being in school at all, not being able to be tutored. Her brain was totally disabled for 3 or 4 years. You lose the ability to interact with your friends. She had 2 or 3 kids that would stay in touch with her, call her maybe once every couple months to say hi. And I mean, I give them a lot of credit because they could have easily just forgotten about her best friends from middle school. This happened between, at the end of 8th grade, so she was on her way to high school and didn't go. So, you're out of sight, out of mind. You're home with mom and dad, great, at 15 years old. At 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, she's there for 5 years with very little socialization, So you lose not only the education aspect, which you can make up, but you lose that socialization that you really can't make up. I mean, that's the formative years. Her passion was soccer. She was an Olympic development soccer player. Could have been all-state. Probably would have been a varsity starter as a freshman. She never got to play. I mean, that to this day, she says that she's 26 now. She says, I knew I would get my education. I knew I wasn't going to let that drop. But she goes, I can never get back those years of soccer that I really look forward to. So, I mean, and that's just, I can tell you the stories I get from parents calling with their kids. It's just heartbreaking what's happening to a lot of our kids. I often say to the schools when I go in and speak, if I could get into your special ed departments and sit down with the kids, I'd be able to probably spot a lot of kids in your special ed that are high risk, high probability of having Lyme and these co-infections. That's what's loading up our special ed roles in many cases. They might be diagnosed with executive functioning deficit because this thing takes down the executive functioning component of the brain, so you can't organize your thoughts or your papers or your days. It might be ADD because it takes away your focus and you can't stay focused on any of your work. It might be diagnosed as bipolar disease because it affects the frontal lobe of the brain where your emotional controls are. It might be diagnosed as defiant disorder, which, because again, that frontal lobe is taken down, they don't have any governor on their emotions, so they lash out and people think they're just misbehaved or, have psychological problems, psychiatric or psychological problems. And in fact, it's an infection of the brain. So, unfortunately, if the pediatricians don't understand the disease, the schools don't understand it. Where are they taking their lead in terms of the medical side of this from? So it's really important to know this is taking down our best and brightest. I mean, it is widespread and it's hitting us hard. If you know of anybody, a kid who might have been a really good student or a good kid or whatever, and all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, is turned another way. You know, it could be drugs, it could be something else, but it oftentimes is nothing that they even know what's going on. It can be this. This can cause learning disabilities that you never had. Somebody who never had dyslexia gets Lyme disease and can have dyslexia or numbers transposition problems. It can cause depression. It can cause, you know, I have a 14-year-old also with it, and this is, both of them have Lyme and Bartonella. My 14-year-old didn't miss a lot of school, and is pretty functional, but the one thing for her, she never probably reached her potential as a student because of the executive functioning. I mean, it's just very hard. We laugh about it because she can turn a house upside down. And adults will talk about this too. With that component of the brain disabled, you can't formulate, you can't organize yourself. You start the day with a list of things to do, and by the end of the day, you've done none of them. It's, you know, part of the brain we take for granted until we lose it. So anyway, just kind of with kids, just understand it's something you have to really watch out for. The politics of Lyme I kind of talked about. I mean, there is this medical establishment narrow view versus what we call the Lyme literate or Lyme community viewpoint. The two groups that are kind of in this debate are the Infectious Disease Society of America, which takes the lead for the medical establishment on Lyme, and the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, which takes the lead for the Lyme literate side. And basically, one side believes 4 weeks of antibiotics is all you almost always need, and doesn't believe there's any such thing as chronic Lyme, and really plays down to a great extent a lot of these co-infections. And then you've got the ones in the trenches who really are saying, this is our plague of the 21st century. This thing is very widespread. As I said before, we might have 30,000 official cases in the country. The CDC admits themselves that they probably are undercounting by a factor of 10, so that'd be 300,000 cases. I will tell you from my 12 years of experience and everything I know about the misdiagnosis, underdiagnosis, and all the reasons why they're missing it, I would tell you that it's probably 100 factor. So you're talking more like 2 or 3 or 4 million cases a year. So this thing is very widespread. We live in the most endemic area. All of New England is highly endemic. The Cape and the Islands are probably the worst of anywhere in the world. We're getting up there though. We're pretty close. And Northern California is very, very bad. Upper Midwest is very bad. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan. But across the country, we have Lyme in every state. And then finally, just to wrap up, the Greater Manchester Lyme Disease Support Group and the New Hampshire Lyme Disease Support Group for Teens are groups available for anybody that wants to come, but typically it's for people with Lyme, and it's basically walk in, there's no registration, there's no charges, nothing. You just come, and I can tell you it's a huge resource for people who are very misunderstood because this disease is there's so much myth and misunderstanding surrounding the disease. So being in a room where people just accept what you're telling them and don't question it is hugely helpful and important. So we are all about providing support and information. It's not a pity party. We don't sit around and moan the fact that we have Lyme. It's really about trying to help ourselves get better. You know, what information can we take from this to get better? And what I preach always in my support groups is the only way you beat this thing, and I'm talking about the chronic Lyme really, which is a whole different disease from acute. The only way you beat it is from patience and perseverance. The people who beat this thing say never quit. I will keep treating, I will keep experimenting with what I can do to get better. And those people are the ones, because it's easy. This thing you can treat and you can get sicker, you can treat and not get well, and you can feel like nothing's going to work. I can tell you from experience, you just have to keep trying and keep beating this thing down, and you eventually will see it turn the corner. So with that, let me just say we are going to open this up to Q&A, and we'll have a mic passed around. All you have to do is raise your hands. We'll call on you, Sherry and I. If it's a tick question, she'll take it. If it's a Lyme question, I'll take it. Feel free, anybody, any question, we'll try to answer it. Sherry?
Thank you, David. Does anybody have a question for either Sherry or for David?
Yeah.
Please.
Hey, I was just wondering, do you recommend like saving the tick to take to the pediatrician's office?
Want to get that? Yeah, you can. Typically, a pediatrician's probably not going to do anything with it. There are places you can send it. For example, UConn down in Connecticut will test, and I think they test for more than just Lyme. They'll test for some of the co-infections. They'll take the tick and test for it. I've understood UMass to be taking ticks in. I think it's like $40, and they will test it for Lyme. IGeneX, by the way, I didn't mention this. As I said before, the local labs, the test from the local labs is not very good. The lab of choice that the Lyme literate doctors use is a lab called IGeneX, IGENEX. It's out in California. You can go to their website, IGENEX.com. And by the way, they do take ticks for testing too. I'm not as big a proponent of testing the tick, because by the time you get the answers, you're missing that window of opportunity. Depending on the shape, the condition of the tick, you don't know whether you really got an accurate read or not. And lots of times you don't test it for the co-infection. So, I mean, by all means, if people want to do that, that's okay, but it's not absolutely necessary.
So, sorry, just to add on to that then, so what do you recommend, because my son had a tick, and I've called the pediatrician, and they said, come back in 6 to 8 weeks, for a blood test then, because, they said, only call if there's symptoms, but, and then they were saying that, the antibodies aren't going to show up. So what do you kind of recommend, what to do as a parent?
Yeah, first of all, and we should use a mic because we are on TV, so from here on, questions should be on mic. But first of all, yeah, the pediatrician is right. The antibodies won't show up in the first few weeks. Basically, you have to wait 3 to 4 weeks. As I said before, you have two choices as a parent or as a patient. You can either treat to the bite, which would mean finding somebody that would be willing to treat to the bite, or just keep a close eye on it, and if you don't see any symptoms, you're probably okay.
When would be the time period that would be safe to not see any symptoms?
It varies so much, it's hard to say. Lots of times you'll see symptoms within the first week, 2 or 3, but sometimes you don't. I mean, as I said, my daughter, we didn't pick up any symptoms, and she ended up being one of the sickest people I've seen with Lyme, and it was so subtle and gradual. If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have picked up on it much sooner, but it still was pretty subtle, and you had to know it to do it. So if you're going to watch them, at least be armed with what all the kind of symptoms you look for are. And, again, in a young child, it's hard because they might have leg aches. And the pediatrician will tell you, well, it's growing pains.
Right.
And it might be, that's what makes it hard for the doctors. I mean, I'm not here to say the doctors have an easy job here. But as I say, because I know this disease so well, I can spot Lyme from a mile away. Not always. I mean, sometimes it's too subtle. But in the obvious cases, it's hitting you between the eyes. But the problem is the doctors don't really understand it well enough.
So you could test for a blood culture at any point, past the, that was, I think, 2 years ago, and then now my 8-year-old has leg pains, but he doesn't necessarily have a lot of it. So do you reckon, then if I was concerned, to request a blood culture?
You could do a blood culture, and if you want to call me, you're welcome to call me, because I could probably give you the name of the lab, and you can go from there, because it probably makes sense. Or you could do IGeneX that way too. If he's got enough symptoms that you're wondering, I would think it'd be worth checking out further. So.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yep.
I just want to talk to your question.
Hold it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell her about that my daughter.
Talk to her privately.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next question.
All the information that you have at the table, is any of that stressed? All the things you've been saying about misdiagnosis and unreliable tests and certain doctors that are in the field and others that are not, is any of that included in the information we have here?
There wouldn't be names of doctors, but there certainly, depending on the resources you're looking at, some will have the ILADS view, the International Lyme and Associated Diseases view, the view that I kind of portrayed tonight. If you get official sources like CDC or Health and Human Services, it could be less directed in that way. So you might have some conflict between the two sides in terms of what you're getting. So it really matters which brochure you're looking at from whom.
I see. It makes you feel as if you can't really do much of anything.
Oh, I hope that's not the message I gave. I mean, the message I want to give is that there is a lot you can do. You just have to be armed with the information to make sure you go beyond the initial phase of going to your primary.
But how do we get that information?
Well, that's people like myself who are, Lyme sport group leaders in the state who, I probably take a dozen calls a week from patients looking for help.
Do you have a business card?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You had mentioned observing children in special education classes. Could you get into more detail about what you were looking for or what you have actually seen?
Sure. Again, it's not always easy, but because Lyme gets into the brain, it can be, you might have a student diagnosed with auditory problems. Lyme can affect the auditory system, so you're not able to process information. You might have a student diagnosed with executive functioning deficit. That's a very common diagnosis in special ed departments today, and it's a legitimate diagnosis. It's the cause of that executive functioning deficit that's in error or isn't known. It's the fact that Lyme can cause that. And I say Lyme, I kind of really mean Lyme and the co-infections, the whole tick-borne complex, because sometimes it's one and sometimes it's the other. But it can cause a student to have tremendous issues with behavioral, where they might be diagnosed with bipolar. And we're seeing, by the way, pediatric bipolar disease is something we didn't see much of 10 years ago, and now it's an epidemic. And I think a lot of it is Lyme. Not all, I don't want to tell everybody that every one of these things is always Lyme. It's not. But in a much higher percentage of cases than we know today, it is. And it's causing all those kind of things. So it can be a myriad of learning issues. There's a group out in California called the Lyme-Induced Autism Foundation, LIA. And it was started by a group of parents whose kids had been diagnosed with autism as young kids. And by the time they were teenagers, they found out they had Lyme. And the parents have done a lot of work now. The estimate is that the autistic spectrum, maybe perhaps a third to a half of it is Lyme disease or Lyme and the other co-infections. So again, that's another. It can look like Asperger's. It can look like autism. So it really is one of these things where doing that differential diagnosis of Lyme is a really important thing, and doing it right is, that's the message tonight is, that doesn't mean just, I went to my doctor and we ran a blood test and it said, no, they don't have it. That's probably the most common thing I see is people saying, well, I was tested and I don't have it. That's such a beginning place to go. You need to be much more thorough in terms of finding out. And again, if you're healthy or you don't have anything that's suspicious of Lyme, don't go looking for it. I'm not saying everybody should worry about Lyme, but if you have symptoms that are very consistent with Lyme, do thorough research, not just go by one blood test.
Thank you very much.
I'm one of those one-bar people. I was just diagnosed recently, and I'm on doxycycline, a graduated increase. I just started it a week ago. But interestingly enough, 10 years ago, I was diagnosed, 12 years ago actually, with lupus, inflammation, severe inflammation of my knees, fatigue. And I do see a rheumatologist, but now I'm wondering, I mean, it was my primary care who requested the Lyme test. So,
It's possible. I mean, I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to diagnose you or tell you he was wrong, but it is true that we do see a lot of misdiagnosis in places, where lupus is the diagnosis, or Sjogren's, or, that's why I say rheumatologists, a lot of what they're diagnosing could easily be Lyme disease.
what's the next step? Do I question her about this? Do I go on different drugs? I'm on a slew of drugs for the lupus. An anti-malarial drug, Celebrex for the pain.
Yeah. I would go further in terms of probably testing and maybe see a Lyme doctor, Lyme litter doctor, and see about getting a full workup. You may find it isn't that, but the problem with a lot of these neurodegenerative diseases or autoimmune diseases is that you're put on steroids. Steroids are the absolute worst thing you can do for a Lyme patient, because keep in mind, this is an active, persistent infection. And what does a steroid do? Steroids suppressing the inflammation, it's suppressing the immune system. It's taking away the only defense you have right now, because you're not being treated with antibiotics. So if you're taking a steroid, you're basically shutting down the immune system and saying, if you do have Lyme, saying to the Lyme bugs, have at it, have a free ride, because there's nothing going to fight you. And so some of our sickest Lyme patients were on steroids for long periods of time. So it's, again, who knows in your case. If it were me, I'd probably want to, do some searching and see whether maybe, I'd want to rule it out anyway. And in terms of the doxycycline, one of the things that'd be a telltale sign probably for you is if there's something we call a Herxheimer effect, which is as you start treating Lyme disease, oftentimes you'll get sicker first. If you feel yourself going downhill, some people who don't realize that Herxheimer is happens often, will say, oh, these drugs aren't working, they're not helping me, and they stop, or I need something else. No, that's actually a sign that it's working, because that's, as you kill off the bugs, they give off toxins that exacerbate the symptoms, and so you can oftentimes go downhill first before you start going uphill. So if you get that kind of a reaction, it could be your recent infection, but it could also be a sign that you're battling a more chronic infection. So.
Thank you.
You talked about not removing ticks with your fingers. Is it possible to get, I've removed hundreds from my dogs, but that way. And I don't know how I got Lyme, but I have been diagnosed with Lyme disease. I don't remember a tick bite. I don't remember a bullseye rash, but I do remember pulling hundreds and hundreds off my dogs. And I don't know, is that possible? Because my vet said it is possible, but.
So the question is,
by getting the blood or the
can you
saliva,
get it that way?
can you get it that way? If you had like a cut or something.
I guess you could. Most of the time, people spend a lot of time saying, well, I didn't see a bite. I don't know how I got it. As Sherry mentioned before, these ticks are so tiny, and particularly the nymph, which is responsible for a lot of the infection, you may never, ever have known you got bit, never see the tick. So it's possible it could come another way. I will tell you, for most people, Lyme is not an airborne disease. This is particularly important for kids and parents, is when people find out you have Lyme disease, sometimes the parents, all of a sudden, you're not getting play dates anymore. The parents get nervous that you're going to spread the disease. It's not that kind of an infectious disease. It typically comes in through a tick bite. Is it possible to get it? A question we usually get is it sexually transmitted? And the odds are yes. There's been no official studies to prove that, but they found it in the fluids, the semen. So chances are, we don't know how easy it is to transmit that way. We do know it can be passed in the womb to the baby. So that is definite. But in terms of transferring it airborne, no. in the saliva, from one person to another, I guess it's possible, but it's not a high probability. I would say in your case, I wouldn't worry too much about it because it's more likely it came through a tick bite. And where pets come in is the pet's exposes to the ticks. I mean, cats and dogs, but particularly cats we allow on our beds. We go to bed, we didn't have a tick on us. We wake up the next morning, we have a tick on us. It probably came in on the cat, if you have an outdoor cat, and they get up on your bed and spread it. If you have dogs come in, again, the ticks will find their way to a warm-blooded mammal and bite you. So pets tend to be a higher risk. Not saying don't have pets, just saying be aware.
Thank you.
Lisa's going to get a workout tonight.
Is there anything that you can spray yourself with, or your kids, or spray your yard with to keep the tick population down?
Yeah, there's DEET, there's permethrin, there's botanicals. Oh, I was just flagged to go to the mic. Yes, there's DEET, there's permethrin. Permethrin is for your clothing. DEET is your exposed skin. Be aware of the concentration that you choose. Again, is ticks on the label. As for your yards, yes, there is it's control, tick control. My company, we do go in routinely and spray yards, and what it does is it breaks the life cycle of the tick. So you're preventing those nymphs from becoming adults, or the larvae from becoming nymphs. So you're breaking that life cycle stage. So yes, and there are botanicals. There's like rosemary, thyme, and peppermint that people can applicate, we can put in your yard. And there's also a conventional bifenthrin product. Okay?
Thank you.
What do you think about those tubes with cotton balls, and what do you say about dealing with woodchucks, not woodchucks, what are they? The little chipmunks that are all over the place near the house when you're just treating the perimeter?
There's a Dave Whitman in Connecticut, right? Yeah, Connecticut. And there's a box. And it's available in New Hampshire and Maine. It's a box. I have a picture of it back in some literature, and I can show you. And it's a box, and basically what it is a bait station. And you put them every 25, 30 feet in your yard. So if you can partner up with a few of your neighbors and get a few of them going, it's not a hard crash of the tick population, but basically what's happening is kind of like that Daminex tube, what you're talking about, that cotton ball tube. This is a rodent will go in and feed. It's a bait station, and they're placed at certain intervals around the yard, and the rodent will go in and feed. And inside is a fipronil wick. So it wicks the animal as it's feeding. So it's getting treated, just like we treat our dogs with that stuff that goes down into the sebaceous gland. So the ticks will not attach. The ticks will drop off. They're not going to get that blood meal. So there is that method as well for a yard. Again, if you can get a group of neighbors, because the more you have out, the better, the more success, the feeding of the white-footed mouse, if you will. And they need to be routine. They cannot be put out by a homeowner. It has to be by someone who is licensed. They have taken the exam, the Board of Pest Control exam in New Hampshire, and who's licensed to apply the product. And they need to come out routinely to check the station. Okay, so and we actually are licensed for that as well in the state of New Hampshire and the state of Maine. I do have a picture of it in my literature in the back.
Chipmunks are bad news?
What do you mean, bad news?
Carrying.
The white-footed is the reservoir.
What about the actual chipmunks?
I believe they are. The mole, the vole, the shrew, the little ones. Yep. Birds will carry them. Deer, it's the taxi cab to the tick. Deer don't get Lyme disease. They're the actual, they will carry many, many miles, that tick inward in the interior. The tick will move great distances attached to a deer because the deer is so mobile.
Other questions?
I've heard ooh, that's loud.
That's, yeah.
Sorry, I'll hold it out here. I've heard stories of dogs especially, which have come up from down south. There's a different strain, I guess, is what has been explained to me, of Lyme disease, which the dog is bringing up with him. And sorry, I had to step out from it, but you're mentioning treating dogs. I mean, would that help in breaking this cycle of reproduction? If more people treat, I know a lot of people that don't treat their dogs. So they become, as you say, a host for the tick and maintain the cycle.
In order for a tick to advance to each life cycle stage, it needs to attach and feed from a warm-blooded animal. So your cat, your dog, a human, a white-footed mouse, anything to feed, to obtain that blood meal. They drop off, and in the environment, they process that blood meal. And that's when the larvae will become a nymph, or the nymph will become an adult, or that adult will lay those 2,000-3,000 eggs. So yes, the more, if we can treat our dogs and our animals and be aware and do those tick checks and remove them, yes, absolutely. And have a heightened awareness about it, absolutely. Go over to your strat.
But I would just say, the more important thing about treating your animals if they have symptoms, because, it's, in a dog, of course, they can't talk and tell you they're having mental problems or what have you, but they can certainly let you know they're lethargic or they're lame. So if you see those kind of symptoms, that might be an indication they have Lyme disease, and treating them, I think it's much more important that we're worried about treating them because it's making them sick. As a carrier, I think it's going to be, I don't think they're the primary reservoir, and I think it's going to be very hard to make that a prime case of why we have to treat them. So
I took treatment as like a fipronil on the back into the spacious glands. That's how I took it.
okay.
And David's taken it as the other aspect. So yes, keeping our dogs safe as well, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Are they coming up with any vaccinations for Lyme? Because I hear of it with dogs.
Yeah, good question.
About humans.
Yeah, there is a vaccination, the Lyme-Rix vax for dogs. It basically is the same vaccination that we had for humans back in, they took it off the market in 2002. The GlaxoSmithKline had a vaccine that basically was a series of 3 booster shots. Unfortunately, an awful lot of people who took that vaccine came down with Lyme symptoms. Did the vaccine give them Lyme, or did the vaccine wake up dormant Lyme in the system? We're not really sure, but they were getting hit with class action suits because of it, and they pulled it off the market. Now, to this day, they'll tell you they pulled it off the market because there wasn't a market. There was plenty of market for it. They just didn't want to face the lawsuits, and I guess dogs don't sue, so it's remained on the market for dogs. But again, it's hard. The vaccine was based on an outer surface protein of the bacteria. I believe that outer surface protein contains the DNA of the bacteria. So, the question is, this is a very, very diabolical little bug and has lots of properties that we don't see typically in bacteria. So it's a little hard to know what exactly can come of something like that. In normal times, that kind of a vaccine would probably be safe, but with Borrelia, we just don't know. More likely what it is doing is it's waking up, because Lyme's so widespread and a lot of people have it in their system but don't have symptoms. You take that vaccine, and it could awaken back, Lyme that was dormant in your system. So, it's not necessarily that it's giving you Lyme, but whatever, it's off the market, and I don't think there's going to be a vaccine anytime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Last call?
Other questions?
You've been a great audience. Thank you very much. And any questions? We'll still be here for a few minutes. So if anybody wants to come up.
Thank you all very much for coming.